Welcome to the Birth Lounge podcast, an empowering space for expecting and new parents to hear candid conversations with experts, support your mental health, and learn the tips and tricks that thousands of parents have used to craft their ideal birth. We will answer all of your questions, the scary ones and the weird ones, to help calm your fears and feel confident going into your birth. I'm going to help you redefine what birth and motherhood looks like and how to embrace your journey. I've intentionally crafted a list of experts to help you navigate pregnancy, explore your birth options, and plan for postpartum so that it can be a time of soaking in your tiny human. We're going to go there on all the hard topics so that you can dive deep into finding your confidence and freeing yourself from fears around birth. With over 10 years of experience in family education and a master's degree in human development and family studies, I created this podcast as a way to share the resources parents need to make educated and informed decisions about their care in pregnancy and childbirth. This is a birth community driven by evidence-based information and research in hopes to help you explore your options, understand your rights, and know what choices you have along the way when it comes to birth and beyond. I'm your host, HeHe. Now let's get to the good stuff. Hello, have you heard about my completely free class that teaches you 6 evidence-based ways to avoid a C-section and reduce your tearing in labor by up to 50%? And remember, I mentioned it was completely free. This class is going to teach you how to advocate for your preferences in the birth room so that you can have a birth that's filled with joy and not birth trauma. Advocating for yourself starts with being empowered with the right information so that you can ask the right questions and confidently make decisions during labor based on what feels good to you and your baby. But here's the thing. The U.S. has one of the highest C-section rates in the world, and it is ever climbing year after year. And it's not because the system is broken, albeit it is, but it's really because women don't have the tools to navigate that broken system. We may not be able to change the system before you have your baby, but what we can do is change how you operate within that system. Change the conversations that you're having with your providers. Change the places that you are getting your information to help you have informed conversation with your doctor before you have your baby. I want to teach you how to do that. We know the reasons that our C-section rates are climbing. We know the reasons that inductions happen so often, and we know the reasons that babies end up in the NICU. I want to help you avoid all of that so that you can have a birth that you love. You can find my free class at thebirthlounge.com/C-section so that you can learn 6 evidence-based ways to avoid a C-section and reduce your tearing in labor. Again, that is thebirthlounge.com/C-section. See you there. Bye. Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Birth Lounge podcast. You guys, I feel like $1 million because I got a new microphone, and I hope that you can hear me a little bit more clear. It's always so much fun to make these like little upgrades in your life where you get to change out something that was old, or, you know, there's just a newer version or something that will just give your life a little spice, a little magic, you know, romanticizing those little moments in life. Well, this is one for me, and I'm just smiling ear to ear with my new microphone. I love it so much, and yeah, just wanted to share that with you. All right, you guys. Today's episode is a really special one, and it's a really kind of targeted one. So today's episode is meant for the moms who really are committed to breastfeeding. And why am I saying this? Well, because most of us are going to have our babies in the hospital, and we think that we assume a lot of the times that the hospital is just set up for breastfeeding, that it is just going to support us and give us everything that we need to breastfeed our baby. But if you have been on my page for any amount of time and you have engaged in any amount of my feeding posts, then you know there's actually a lot of bureaucracy or bureaucratic influences within the hospital that pushes formula feeding for your baby. Now, make no mistake, this is not an anti-formula episode. Actually, we talk about in this episode how and when formula can be very helpful. You know that I am pro formula if that is what works best for your baby. But what I do know also is that a lot of women, a lot of moms, a lot of families have goals of breastfeeding. They're committed to it, they're dedicated to it, and then by way of having absolutely no support, having formula pushed, encountering fear-based information and care within the hospital systems, they are convinced, coerced, sometimes even bullied against their will to introduce formula. Now, I don't know if you know this, but introducing formula can absolutely derail your breastfeeding journey. It doesn't have to. There are ways that you can do them both. There are ways that we can temporarily use formula as well. But if you really, really are dedicated and committed and you want to prioritize breastfeeding, you need to do specific things in the hospital so that you can really preserve that breastfeeding relationship with you and your baby. And it is not just things like latch your baby often. It is going to be things that your hospital staff are actually telling you is hospital protocol, and you're going to need to know the questions to ask and how to navigate those situations and those conversations so that you can get your family's goals met. I'm so excited to be being joined by a good friend of mine, Trisha Ludwig, who is also a CNM or a certified nurse midwife. She's also an IBCLC, an international board certified lactation consultant with a master's degree from Yale in the School of Nursing. She has been a homebirth midwife and has run a holistic gynecology and women's health practice for the last 10 years. She's also the mom of 3 who were all born at home. Trisha is passionate about supporting and optimizing women's transitions through their major shifts of their reproductive health journey. She believes in treating health issues on a physical, emotional, and spiritual level. I know you guys are gonna love her just as much as I love her. She's close by in Connecticut. I'm in Boston. So I'm lucky enough to have had the opportunity to meet Trisha in person. You also may recognize her voice as one half of the Down to Birth show. In this episode, Trisha shares her top tips to helping you understand what evidence-based things you can do in the hospital to get your breastfeeding journey off to the right start. All right, without further ado, you guys, Trisha, welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks for having me. I'm very
Thanks
happy to
for
be
being
here.
here. I'm so excited for this conversation. And I mentioned before, but you and I are like friends outside of this, professional realm. And so I'm just excited to be hanging out with you again because the last time we hung out, I had so much fun.
I know we could have talked for hours that day, and that's when we were like, wait a minute, we got to just bring this on the podcast because
We need to
we're
record
taking
this.
we're taking on all the things today. But actually, I think that day we didn't talk too much about breastfeeding. We talked a lot more about birth, but today we're going to talk about breastfeeding.
Yeah, I'm excited. I'm excited. And, this is something that is super hard for a lot of people. And when it is your first baby, it feels very overwhelming because not only do you not know what you're doing, but you also don't know what to expect. Not to say that your second and third and fourth and fifth baby are going to be easy, but to say like you have already done it once so that unexpected, like I don't really know what's coming my way is kind of removed because you have already done it before. Before we dive into, what actually leads to successful breastfeeding and tips that people need to know. Can we start first with what's the data say about breastfeeding our baby? What are the benefits? Why should we really consider breastfeeding our baby? What does mom have to gain? What does baby have to gain? What do we need to know about that?
Well, there are tremendous benefits to both mother and baby. So oftentimes parents just think that, they should breastfeed their baby because it's what's good for the baby, but it's actually really good for the mother as well. So as long as it's going well, if it's complicated and difficult, then sometimes it's not so good for the mother and her mental health. But breastfeeding is actually protective of mental health postpartum. It actually decreases the risk of postpartum depression and anxiety. It's an anti-inflammatory process for the body. So, and the hormone oxytocin, which of course is the main hormone of birth and breastfeeding, is a very calming, loving, connecting, bonding hormone. So that has tremendous benefits for the mother's mental health. There's also all kinds of data around decreasing the risk of cancer, breast cancer especially. It's a huge one. Ovarian cancer, bone health, brain health. All breastfeeding is really important for all of those things, And of course, for the baby, a dramatic improvement in gut health, allergies, cancer rates, brain development. There was actually an article in 2003 in the Lancet, which is a very reputable medical journal, which stated that exclusively breastfeeding a baby for 6 months could prevent 13% of childhood death
Wow.
and save over 1 million babies annually.
Wow.
It's huge. It's huge. And I don't say that to make non-breastfeeding mothers feel bad by any means. But the point is, just like with birth, we have to be educated. We have to know what's best for our body and what's best for our baby. And a mother gets to make whatever choice she wants to make around feeding. But if we don't provide the education and support, she may not be able to make the best choice for herself and her baby. And of course, there's a whole debate about, breast is best or fed is best. And my belief is that breastfeeding and breast milk is best for every baby. There's no doubt. We can't argue that. But it isn't always the best choice for every mother. And how do we help make it the best choice for every mother? Because that benefits the baby. And I think if mothers really can find breastfeeding to be more easy and comfortable and supported, then that is more naturally what they're going to want to choose anyway. But because we don't live in a society that supports or values breastfeeding, and mothers are also often led to believe that breastfeeding is really easy.
Mm,
It should just happen naturally. And that's a big myth.
yeah.
It really is.
Yeah.
Even though it is instinctual for a baby to breastfeed, and it is instinctual for a mother to want to put her baby to the breast, breastfeeding is not actually that instinctual. It's really a learned process.
I always say that breastfeeding is a learned skill, that breastfeeding your baby may be the natural way to do it, but it is not a natural skill. It is a learned skill. You have to afford yourself a learning curve. Not only do you not know what you're doing, but your baby doesn't either. And I've mentioned this on the podcast before with other things, but just because you've done it before doesn't mean you know exactly what to do with second, third, fourth babies. All your babies are going to be different. All of their anatomy is going to be different, similar, but different. Your anatomy has changed, similar, but different. It's just every breastfeeding relationship is going to be different. And I think a lot of people get caught up in, but I've done this before. And, why is it hard this time? Or why am I struggling when this is the natural way to feed my baby?
Yes, it's definitely true. Also, very similar to birth, that subsequent breastfeeding relationships are generally easier. It's generally easier for a mother to make milk the second, third, fourth time around, the same way it's a little easier for her body to give birth the second or third or fourth time around, but not always because of exactly what you said. Every mother and baby is a unique dyad. There are no two dyads exactly the same anywhere in the world.
Hmm.
And that's why breastfeeding advice is so important that it's individualized. Because if you just go to Google and you try to Google your way through a breastfeeding challenge, the advice that is out there is not going to necessarily apply to you because every mom is different, every breast is different, every baby's mouth is different, every baby's appetite is different, every mother's milk supply is different. I mean, the combinations of how a mom and baby can be different are endless. So you have to get the support of somebody who understands all the dynamics of breastfeeding and get an individualized plan to help you if breastfeeding is not happening easily and naturally. And so often it isn't. I mean, sometimes it does. Sometimes it just works. And it actually works best for moms and babies who have grown up around breastfeeding, whose
Hmm.
sisters breastfeed, whose friends breastfeed, whose mothers breastfeed. If they've seen a lot of breastfeeding in their life, they're more likely to be successful with it. If they give birth in a supportive breastfeeding environment, they're much more likely to be supported. People don't realize how much where we give birth, how we give birth, hospital policies,
Who's around you?
who's around you. Yes, how supportive the people are around you. Even what happens in the first 24 hours after birth can influence the entire duration of your breastfeeding journey.
Hmm.
Because what happens in the first 24 hours influences what happens in the first 3 days.
Hmm.
What happens in the first 3 days sets the stage for what happens in the first 2 weeks. What happens in the first 2 weeks sets the stage for your entire breastfeeding journey, which might be 3 or 4 years.
Wow. Wow. Okay, I want to stop right here at the support because I think something that a lot of people are not prepared for, although you and I talk about it all the time, and we are prepared for it and we prepare people for it. how little support there is actually in the hospital and how fast they are going to suggest formula to you. So if you are planning to breastfeed and you feel very strongly about breastfeeding, what do we need to know about going into the hospital to advocate against having people push formula on us when it's not our plan? I'm not talking about people who are open to it or want it. I am talking about people who do not want to formula feed their baby. They are very committed to breastfeeding. How are we going to, I guess, facilitate that type of support in the hospital?
The first thing is, and the most simple thing is, do not separate yourself from your baby. Do not let your baby go anywhere. If you remain skin to skin with your baby, especially in the first 24 hours, but really for the first few days, your breastfeeding journey will be off to a good start. If your baby goes to the nursery, even if your baby goes to get a bath, which seems like such a benign little intervention, it actually has a major impact on sucking and feeding. A baby who doesn't breastfeed well in the first 24 hours is a lot more likely to have significant jaundice. And jaundice can last for weeks, and that can seriously impact a baby's ability to breastfeed. A baby who goes to the nursery and has any amount of separation from their mother might miss one or two feedings. The hospitals become very busy at times, and it's very easy for even a very well-intentioned nurse or lactation consultant to, not get your baby back to you in time. Babies feed very frequently in the first 3 days. I mean, they might feed 12 to 15 times in 24 hours. So if they're away from you for any amount of time, they're potentially missing a feeding opportunity. Mothers and babies should not be separated at all.
I agree with that. I actually could not agree more with that. Okay, so talk to us about the Harmon given formula. So for the providers out there that are like, okay, it's just one feeding, just do it. Or families who might have that feeling of like, well, it's just one feeding. What can it hurt? We'll feed next time. Talk to us about what we need to know about actually interrupting that connection and skipping a feed in your breast because it's going to impact things.
Yes, so it impacts things on two levels. One, the impact on the baby's gut microbiome, because a baby is designed to have colostrum for the first 3 to 4 days. They are not designed to have breast milk. If they were designed to have breast milk right away,
We would have breast
then
milk.
they would have breast milk right away. There's a reason that we have colostrum.
Colostrum.
Yes. It helps establish the gut microbiome. It's a necessary part of sealing the gut. The baby's gut is sterile when they're born. There's nothing in it. They've swallowed a little amniotic fluid, but it's basically a sterile environment. And colostrum actually helps the gut mucosal layer seal over. So if you don't get that colostrum and you go straight to formula, which often happens because if a baby isn't feeding well in the first day, which they often are not because they've been separated, because there's been various things that have happened in labor and birth that may, make them more sleepy, especially drugs in labor, then even one dose, one bottle, one serving of formula actually changes the baby's gut microbiome for a very long time.
Wow.
And that's their immune system. That is when a baby's immune system is established for life. So it's actually a very big deal. Obviously, if you're not producing colostrum, breast milk would be fine to give the baby. But I really strongly discourage every mother I work with to not allow any formula in the first few days. A baby doesn't need it. They have brown fat. They have ways of getting donated breast milk. There's no reason to give a baby formula in the first few days.
Okay,
Now,
talk
I
to
do
us.
use formula in my practice. So I'm not saying no formula ever. I mean, sometimes formula is needed. I'm always going to look for breast milk or donated source of breast milk first, but you have to feed the baby. You can't starve a baby, right? We have to give them milk from some form, wherever we need to get it when they need it. But they don't need it in the first 3 days.
Yeah. You can also harvest your colostrum in pregnancy so that you
Yes.
have it once your baby is here. We have episodes on that. So we won't talk about that right now, but you can do that so that once your baby is here, you already have it. But Trisha, talk to us about weight loss because a lot of times it's that fear of your baby's losing too much weight or being told that your baby is losing too much weight too fast that then prompts parents to maybe agree to formula when they otherwise would not have. So what do we need to know about that?
Well, when I said babies don't need formula in the first few days, I want to make sure it's clear that babies need food in the first 3 days. They're not meant to burn on brown fat for 3 days and have no intake whatsoever. But they need so the first thing would be to look for donated breast milk. You mentioned prenatally harvesting colostrum. I think that's great. The only downside I see to that is that sometimes moms can feel really discouraged if they're
Mm.
unable to do it in late pregnancy. And that doesn't mean that they can't get colostrum out after their baby is born.
Or that you
So,
don't have any. It's
yeah,
definitely in
exactly.
there.
Yes. So sometimes it's just harder to get it out until after the baby's born. And then you have a whole different slew of hormones and things working in your body that help you get it out more. So go for it if you want to, but please don't feel discouraged or like there's a problem if you're not able to prenatally, save some. So weight loss after birth is normal, of course, because babies have a lot of water in their body. And especially if you've had IV fluids in labor, they're going to have even more, and the weight loss is going to be even greater. Bigger babies tend to lose a little bit more. So up to about, I like 8%, but I'm not going to get that picky about percentages and numbers. But over 10% weight loss in the first few days is a bit of a red flag. So it really shouldn't be much more than that, but you still again have to take into consideration how big was this baby? Did they have fluids in labor? How long was the labor? That kind of thing. So sometimes even an 11 or 12% weight loss can be normal in a bigger baby.
Yeah.
But weight loss alone is not a reason to give formula in the first few days. And they don't really start regaining weight until your milk comes in. And that's normal. And
Mm.
that is generally on the third or fourth day for first time moms, third day usually for multips or mothers who have had a baby before. Sometimes day two if you've had a lot of babies, it can come in sooner.
And what if you have an epidural or any sort of narcotics in your labor? Is that going to impact when your milk comes in?
It can. Yeah, it
Yeah.
definitely can delay. So I do see a lot of moms who have had C-sections or inductions, induced labors that
Hmm.
the milk doesn't come in until day five,
Yeah.
maybe day six. And then, yeah, you are at that point facing a challenge and you do need supplemental milk if your milk hasn't come in at that
Yeah.
point. And at that
Yeah.
point, it might be formula if you can't get donated milk. But fortunately, donated milk is becoming more and more common in hospitals, and that needs to continue to increase.
Yeah, we love to see it. Okay, so instead of introducing formula, the answer would be what? To get some lactation support in there so that we can find out why this baby is not latching or why maybe figure out why maybe your milk hasn't transitioned in.
And get a pump on those breasts. Absolutely. I mean, if your milk isn't in on day four or your baby hasn't been latching well in the first few days, then you got to get a pump on right away. You
Mm,
can use your hand to hand express. So I think one of the benefits, one of the biggest benefit actually of doing prenatal colostrum harvesting is that you learn to hand express before you need to. So if you practice it prenatally, if you need to use it after your baby's born, it's going to be way easier if you already know how to do it and you're already comfortable touching your breast. That's not something that women are generally like familiar with. So, learning to get the colostrum or the milk out of your breast with your hand is an incredibly important skill. It's like the most important thing you can do skill wise to help support your breastfeeding journey. So, if your baby's not latching, then you are using your hand or a hand pump in the first 3 days to help get the colostrum flowing. If your milk doesn't come in on the third or fourth day, yes, now we're looking for some supplemental sources of food for the baby, but we're also pumping the breasts at least 8 times in 24 hours.
mm,
Probably 10 to 12 is better because that's
mm.
how often a baby would be feeding. You need to stimulate the breast so the breasts tell the brain how much milk to make and to start bringing in the milk for the baby if it hasn't come in yet.
Well, because it is a supply and demand type of system, right? So the more that we
Yes.
pull out of our bodies, the more that our bodies will make for us. And I think a lot of hospital lactation support really fails to help women understand the process behind breast milk supply and the process behind removing that milk and the benefits of being able to connect with your baby and have a proper latch. A lot of it is just from my experience, is just to mark it off that yes, we tried to breastfeed, or to mark it off that yes, we did this task on our list. And unfortunately, that really doesn't set people up for good breastfeeding success because they didn't learn anything. They were just stepped through a series of instructions. And once the instructions were done, they were a lot of times told, like, okay, well, we'll be back. And it's like, well, I don't even have anything to practice between now and the time you come back. I didn't learn anything.
Yes, and unfortunately, the support that women get in the hospital for lactation services is pretty much just for the moment that they're there, and it's not being discussed how what they do there is going to influence what happens down the line. So that's when I end up seeing the moms is 2 or 3 weeks down the line when, they thought they left the hospital with the right advice, but there really was no downstream plan for what was going to
Mm.
happen if the baby wasn't latching well or hadn't been feeding enough. Again, back to how the same thing in birth, it really, the focus is on the baby. Once that baby's born, the OB or the midwife is happy and the mom is kind of forgotten about. And it's the same thing with breastfeeding. They just care about the baby gaining weight and getting fed enough. And like you said, checking the boxes. And of course, there are really good lactation consultants in the hospital who
Yep.
genuinely care
Yep.
about the mother and baby, but they also don't even necessarily, they don't see moms and babies 2, 3, 4, 6 weeks down the line. So they don't even necessarily know what happens. They're just really focused on what's happening in those first few days, which is basically make sure the baby has enough output and, get enough ounces in them. And that's kind of the end of the story.
Yeah, and not all hospitals, actually, not a lot of hospitals have lactation services. So a lot of lactation is being done by nurses. And when I talk to nurses, they almost always say, like, I don't have too much lactation knowledge. Like, I really just what I got in nursing school. And unless they seek it out themselves, then, you know, they may not have really deep lactation knowledge. And your lactation consultants in the hospital are faced with the same things that our nurses and our doctors, the time restraints and the resources and being poorly understaffed and having so many patients to see. And it's just, you know, it's the politics of it all. So I don't think it's anybody's fault. I just think that there should be a
Well, it
conversation about what you can do instead, you know?
It goes back to the system, same as birth.
Totally.
It's the system's
Totally.
fault. The system is not set up for success. Time is a huge factor. If
Hmm.
you're not spending an hour helping a mom with a newborn baby, you're not seeing the full story. You're not seeing the full picture. If you just get them latched on and leave, well, great, the baby's latching, but that doesn't mean that we're observing a good solid feeding and helping the mom learn when to switch sides and how to use her hands or not, or learning the satiety cues or what to do when the baby comes off. How do you know if they're full or not? What's like just looking at a latch and walking out the door and saying the baby latched and fed well for 5 minutes isn't that's not sufficient.
Yeah, well, it's not the whole puzzle, right? It's like one piece. Like, yes, we got a great
It's
latch.
a glimpse in time.
Exactly. Now, what does the rest of that whole puzzle look like? Okay, so now that we've kind of established how little care someone might have access to in their hospital, depending on where you give birth and when, you guys. So a lot of times if you do have lactation, it is just 1 day a week, or it's just on Monday through Fridays, 8 to 5, or it's just on Saturdays because that's when the community lactation consultant that doesn't work full time for the hospital can devote 8 hours of her time. Like there's so many restrictions to this. So if we get into the hospital and we find like we don't have the lactation support that we need or that we thought we might have, what are we doing to actually set ourselves up to have a successful breastfeeding relationship?
Well, the best thing you can do is get educated prenatally.
Okay.
So, like I said in the beginning of the episode, what happens in the first 24 hours sets up the first 3 days. What happens in the first 3 days sets up the first 2 weeks. So, I teach a 1 hour prenatal breastfeeding course that basically explains everything you need to know to get started in the first 2 weeks. And once you get that basis and that foundation, you're off to a much better start already. And then you may just need the lactation support help if you're having a little bit of a difficult latch. So, and the lactation consultants in the hospital are great at helping with latch, unless they are the ones who just throw a nipple shield at moms who are having trouble latching. That is not a good solution. So, and that happens a lot. So if you already know if you already have the foundational understanding of how breastfeeding works, then basically we're just seeing what the baby does when the baby comes out, how well it works. And if you keep the mom and baby skin to skin and the baby instinctually will latch on, and if latch is working well, then we're already off to a brilliant start. If the latch isn't working, then a lactation consultant in the hospital can help you. And then if you are having any weight issues or pain or things like that, then you have hopefully your lactation consultant in your back pocket that you're going to use as soon as you go home. So the plan is, have the knowledge before you give birth. Use the resources you have in the hospital while you're there. And then as soon as you are out of the hospital, you're meeting with your lactation consultant who is hopefully coming to your home in the first 2 weeks.
Um,
That's a big thing. That's very important because any amount of disrupting the opportunity for a baby to feed who is going to feed 8 to 14 times, usually like 10 to 12 on average in 24 hours. Like, how do you have time to go to appointments? You're going to miss a feeding.
Hmm. Which is also an ode to midwifery here because they come to your home birth midwifery. They
Yes.
come to your home and you don't have to leave. You don't have to go out and do that. I mean, I guess for the pediatrician you would, but not for an OB appointment or a hospital appointment or birth center appointment. So, okay, prenatally. Oh, let's see. I had a question and I lost it. Education prenatal. Hmm. It literally walked right out of my brain.
It's okay. It'll come back.
Oh, no, I do know. There it is. All right, where was I? I'll just walk us right into this. Okay, what about seeing an IBCLC if you're not having trouble? So you say have somebody lined up for when you come home. What about like if everything's going well? Are we checking in with our IBCLC to say like, hey, things are going well, I'll keep you posted? Or do they come preemptively? Or do we just like let them know prenatally, I'll call you if I have a problem, and then we don't reach out unless we have a problem?
So in my dream world, every woman would have a prenatal consult on lactation, go through if it's your first time, then there's a ton to learn. If it's not your first time and you had any trouble with a prior breastfeeding relationship, then it's a good time to talk through what that was and how, we can preemptively, hopefully avoid that. But again, we don't always know because every baby is a little bit different. But you have your prenatal consult. Then after the baby's born, you let your lactation consultant know that the baby is born, and then you're staying in touch by text or phone call in the first few days, just checking in that everything is going okay. If there's any major issues coming up in the first 24 to 48 hours, especially it's good to have that resource right there in your pocket if the nurses or somebody's trying to push formula or a nipple shield or take the baby away for some reason. Your lactation consultant can be an advocate for you at that point, and they can advocate for you. So then, yes, I like to see, even if a mother feels like everything is going great, I usually like to see them sometime in the first 2 weeks just to double check. And if it's a 30-minute visit, then fine. Everything's fine. I feel like sometimes moms feel guilty for, oh, I shouldn't have had a visit. I think everything is fine. I just wanted to check. But like, yes, do that. Please make sure everything is fine. Sometimes I can give you one little tip of advice of just how to tweak a latch or when to switch sides or take a look at the baby and find something just little that might make a big difference in the long run. So, yeah, I think the follow up is always a great idea. And then if you are actually having a breastfeeding problem, then weekly check ins are important until the problem is resolved. Every single week, the issue evolves and changes a little bit. Breastfeeding is always evolving and changing. So, it's important to have those regular follow ups.
Yeah. Well, along with that change, your baby's body is growing. So whatever we're doing habitually, your baby's body is growing around and with that. So we want to make sure that as they grow, we're setting them up for like a proper latch and, we don't want them to get used to doing the wrong thing.
Well, the two top reasons that women stop breastfeeding early or don't achieve their breastfeeding goal, which is different for every mother, but ideally it's 6 months to a year of exclusive breastfeeding. But many moms stop well before that, as early as 6 weeks, for two reasons. One, pain
Mm.
of the nipples that has never been addressed or resolved, or two, that they didn't have enough milk. That's the most common thing I see. And so having a regular consult with a lactation consultant can ensure that you're doing all the right things in order to maintain your milk supply. There's so many different reasons that you might not have enough milk, and it is almost never because the mom can't produce it. That's what the mom thinks. That's not the reason. It's baby driven. If you're not making enough milk, it's because your baby's not removing enough milk. They're not stimulating you to make enough milk. And that's for a number of reasons.
Mm.
So, how do we get mothers breastfeeding longer? We make sure that we're tracking weight gain. We make sure that the mother's milk supply is reflected in the weight gain. If a baby is not gaining enough weight, and breastfeeding babies gain at least an ounce a day in the early weeks, then the mother's milk supply is going down as the baby's weight doesn't keep up. So, the slow weight gaining baby is the baby that results in the mom who 6 or 8 or 12 weeks down the line says, I don't have enough milk anymore. And usually they start giving formula at some point along the way, and then they don't know that they need to pump to compensate to increase their milk supply.
Mm. So instead of giving formula, you would, well, maybe not instead completely, but alongside formula, if you really needed it, you would be pumping to help pull out that milk so that you could increase your milk supply.
Yes, so your baby has to consume enough calories in a day to grow at the steady rate that their body wants to grow at. And you have to compensate with pumping to increase your milk supply or replace basically the milk that they're consuming. So that's where the advice that the pediatricians often give, like, oh, just give the baby a little top up. Very bad advice if your goal is to exclusively breastfeed. It will ruin your milk supply if you do that, and don't pump. Anything that your baby is consuming that your breasts aren't making, your breasts are going to make less.
Mm. So it's an ounce for ounce match. Whatever your baby consumes, your boobs need to be being asked of that each day, right? So whether that's from
Basically.
your baby or with a pump, we need to be asking that equal amount from your boobs.
Yes, supply and demand need to be in sync. Whatever your baby is demanding or needing to grow normally is what your body needs to be producing. And if you're supplementing with an outside milk source, then your body is not producing that unless
Yeah.
you're pumping it and storing it for some reason, but that would be unusual.
Yeah. Okay, and what about lazy eaters? So you hear a lot of moms say my baby's just lazy. They just don't when I put them to the breast, they won't work hard. It's just like such a struggle to get them to do a full feed. What about that? What do we need to know?
That is mainly a result of flow. Babies suck in response to flow. So when you put them to the breast and they have a good latch and you have a good milk supply, your breast milk will flow. When your breast milk is not flowing as much, then the baby is going to slow down and get sleepy. So, how do we make sure we have a good flow? One, you need to make sure you have a full milk supply. So, basically, by 2 weeks of age, your breast should be up to somewhere between 2 and 3 weeks, but ideally by 2 weeks. Your breast milk supply should be at a full supply, which is on average about 24 ounces a day. I don't like to say numbers too much because we're not supposed to know,
And
right?
people get really hung up on it. So
People
it's a
get really hung up on
spectrum. It's
numbers.
a
Yeah.
spectrum.
But really, like very broadly speaking, on average, your breast with a full milk supply for an average baby will make 24 ounces in 24 hours or about an ounce per hour. But that can vary. Sometimes of the day you might make less, sometimes of the day you might make more. You don't need to know this again because we're not measuring what comes out of the breast. But the sleepy baby might be an underweight baby. It might be a jaundiced baby. It might be a baby with the tongue tie who can't effectively, efficiently remove the milk. So they're just going to fall asleep at the breast. Of course, that's where they want to be. And so, yes, a ton of moms say, my baby just falls asleep. I put them to the breast and they just fall asleep. So that's a good reason to see a lactation consultant. You have to figure out what the underlying cause is. Are they underweight? Are they jaundiced? Do they have a tongue tie? Do they just have a bad latch? Or does the mom not have a full milk supply? Does she not have a good milk supply? Because again, the baby will suck in response to the flow. And when the flow slows down, they'll go to sleep. Or maybe the baby is bottle feeding with a really fast flow bottle. And if a baby gets used to a fast flow bottle, then they come to the breast has a variable flow. So when the baby first latches on, there's not a lot of flow. That's why they do the little flutter sucks to stimulate the breast to have a letdown. A letdown is when the oxytocin contracts the muscles in the breast and the milk gets pushed out of the breast in a faster flow. That's when you hear the baby actively sucking and swallowing. And then the letdown passes and the baby goes back to the little flutter sucks. And they do that for a little while. And then another letdown might happen, or they might fall asleep. So before they fall asleep, you want to switch them to the other side if they're not already full. So if they kind of haven't fallen off the breast and they're like zonked out, milk drunk, then before they get too sleepy, you try the other side. And sometimes I have moms switch back and forth 3 or 4 times in a
In one
feeding.
feed.
Yep. Especially for the sleepy baby.
Hmm. You recommend always offering both boobs to like kind of all babies?
No, not as a strict rule. So there are no strict rules in breastfeeding. It really needs to be baby led. And again, every mother, her breast is different. How much milk is in her breast is different at different times of the day. How fast her rate of milk production is different times of the day. So we really want it to be baby led. You have to learn your baby's language and you change sides based on their cues. In the first 2 weeks, when we're building a milk supply, I do usually recommend that moms try to get to both sides in every feed. But once your milk supply is established, a baby might become a one sided feeder. They might do every other feed, both breasts. They might do 3/4, one breast, and a quarter of them, two breasts. No strict rules on that. And
Mm.
definitely not by time.
Yeah. Yeah. I had just a client really literally today tell me, well, one of my friends said that if I fed for 30 minutes, then my baby would be full.
Mm.
And we had just gotten done talking about when she pulls the baby off the breast, the baby is still rooting. And I was like, yeah, but your baby's clearly not full, right? It's like we have got physical signs of when your baby is full. Can you tell us what a full baby versus a still hungry baby looks like?
Yes, this is such an important thing to know. And this is what, if you do a prenatal breastfeeding class, this is what you should be learning because how else are you supposed to know, right? There's no gauge in your
Or
baby's
guidebook. Nobody sends
in
you
your
home
baby's
with like,
tummy
here's
telling
what
you.
it looks like.
Yeah, you have to learn your baby. Babies have great communication skills if we learn them. So hunger cues and satiety or satiation cues are really important to understand because one baby can feel full, become full and fully fed at the breast in 10 minutes, and another baby is going to take 45.
Mm-hmm.
Both things are normal.
Mm-hmm.
Both things happen. So putting time on breastfeeding is one of the biggest mistakes that people can make. And I still hear it all the time. It just shocks me. I just can't believe that people are still being told to feed 10 minutes on each side. So, anyway, what you look for hunger cues first. So, in a newborn baby, a baby whose eyes are open is basically a hungry baby because they sleep so much. So if their eyes are open, bring them to the breast because the sooner you bring them to the breast, the easier the latch is going to be. The more hungry they become, the more upset they become, the harder it's going to be. A crying baby is a very difficult baby to latch. You should always calm your baby down first before you try to latch them. Babies get hangry very easily.
Yeah, they do.
Yeah. And you think of adults when we're hangry, like trying to comprehend anything is impossible. Try to learn a new skill when you're hangry. You're not going to. Try to study or learn when you're hangry. You're not going to. And now imagine a baby and they're learning a skill. So we always want to try to catch them before they're hungry. So if eyes are open, that's the first feeding cue. The next thing is that they'll start licking their lips. Their little tongues will start going. Then they'll start rooting. So most people have probably seen or experienced this. If you put a baby up here on your chest or your shoulder, or anyone picks them up, if they're hungry, they're going to start bobbling their head around and trying to like breast seek. They'll do it on anyone. Doesn't have to be the mom. So if you see a baby doing that, now they're like really trying to tell you, feed me, feed me, feed me. The next thing they'll do when they're trying to actually self soothe, getting so hungry, is they're going to suck on their hands. So the hands will go to the mouth and they'll start trying to keep themselves calm by sucking on their hands. And then the last thing is crying. By the time they're crying, they're pretty much in that hangry state. Now, some babies do go from 0 to 60, so don't feel bad. Of course, your baby's going to cry sometimes. It happens. So, but yes, those are the main feeding cues, and those are the opportunities that you always want to feed your baby at. And you know what? If they're not hungry, then you put them to the breast and they don't feed. So you always try. But a newborn baby who's doing any of those things is going to want to eat.
Hmm. Yeah.
So then how do we know that we have fed them long enough? The satiety cues, the first thing is the absence of feeding cues. So if they come off your breast and they are showing no feeding cues, that's a good sign. However, sometimes just sucking gets a baby very relaxed and sleepy, but they're not actually full. So they're just kind of tired. So you can look at the tension in their body. A hungry baby is tense. Their fists are clenched. Their arms are going to be up at their face. Their brow is usually furrowed. A full baby is very relaxed. Their hands go from looking like this to being open, and their arms get floppy. They're like rag dolls. Like you can pick
Yeah.
up their arm and they're just like, blah. That is a milk drunk baby. That is what you want to get to as often as you can. It doesn't have to happen 100% of the time. It can be hard to get a baby milk drunk 100% of the time. Sometimes they do just fall asleep. But putting a baby up on your chest is always the best test. I call this home base. Put your baby in home base. And if they just settle in and sleep there, they're good, at least for now. Might be 10 minutes, might be 15 minutes, might be 45, might be an hour and a half. I don't know. Then you feed them the next time they cue. But if you put them up here and they're bobbing their head around and they're trying to get back down to your breast, you got to feed them again.
So
And you
let's talk
teach them.
about, yeah, let's talk about how often we keep doing that. What's the frequency? So we've all seen that really great graphic where it's like Cheerios in a line, and all of
Oh,
your
yeah.
feedings are the exact same amount of time apart. So you're feeding on the dot every 2 hours, and you're feeding for what you said, 10 minutes each boob, so 20 minutes each time. And then you have underneath that blueberries, and you've got a large blueberry and a small blueberry and a small blueberry and a medium blueberry and a large blueberry and a large blueberry. And you can see
Mhm.
there's a lot of variety, right? And it says that the Cheerios is what a lot of times people expect breastfeeding to be like. And then the blueberries is what it's actually like. I think that sometimes in the hospital, we can be given the instructions to feed every X amount of time for this amount of minutes. And that can sometimes feel really discouraging if you get into a situation where your baby is needing to feed every 10 to 15 minutes, or they are feeding every 30 to 45 minutes in particular parts of the day. I'm not talking about 10 to 20 minutes for 24 hours. I'm talking about they did, you had a 3 hour stint there where they literally fed every 10 to 30 minutes around the clock for those 3 hours. That can sometimes, as a mom, feel like, well, I must not have enough milk supply. They must be hungry. Talk to us about what we need to know about kind of keeping our mindset in check when we get in those situations, and why that is so, so normal.
Yes. So I love that graphic. It's such a good one. And I
Me
actually just
too.
saw it. I just saw it for the first time. And I was like, what? How have I never seen this before? This is such a good depiction of the difference between feeding every 3 hours and feeding on demand.
Yeah.
So the two things are both true, but feeding on demand is not the same as feeding every 3 hours. Your baby needs to feed at least every 3 hours. And this has sort of come to mean feed your baby every 3 hours. Those two things are not the same thing. Feed your baby at least every 3 hours because then they will ensure that they get at least 8 feeds in 24 hours. But you must feed your baby sooner if they cue. So you always have to feed your baby on demand and a minimum of at least every 3 hours. You should wake your baby in the first couple of weeks if they don't self wake at 3 hours. Now, that's only in the beginning. Later on, if they're gaining weight well and breastfeeding is going well, they can start to self wake naturally overnight when they want to. But you still should feed them every 3 hours during the day because they need to get enough feeding in a 24-hour period. And you don't really want them taking a 5 or 6 hour stretch of sleep during the day and then feeding every 2 hours overnight. You would rather it be the other way around.
Yeah.
So, babies who are bottle feeding can feed the exact same amount on the exact same schedule because they get trained. They'll get trained to have 3 ounces every 3 hours. They'll have 24 ounces in 24 hours. And that's why people like bottle feeding. It's very predictable. Breastfeeding is not. Breastfeeding is variable throughout the day. Your baby's appetite is actually variable throughout the day, the same way we are as adults. We don't eat the same amount at the same time every day unless you train yourself to do that. And some people do. And so babies can be very easily trained with bottles to do that. They may not like it, but you can do it. But that's not breastfeeding. Breastfeeding is, again, variable throughout the day because our breasts make milk at different rates throughout the day. Most mothers make the most milk between midnight and noon and a little less between noon and midnight. Sometimes it's the opposite. And babies have various, their appetite varies throughout the day. Sometimes they want a snack. Sometimes they want a meal. Sometimes they want a meal and then dessert. Sometimes they cluster feed, like you said. So you just have to follow the cues. And this is why, again, it's so important that in the first 2 weeks, a mother has enough support at home that she can just focus on feeding her baby because it is a tremendous amount of work in the first 2 weeks. It really is. It's a
Mm.
lot. They're feeding 10 to 14 times in 24 hours. Plus, you need to sleep. Plus, you need to eat. You might get a shower. Then some moms have 3 appointments in those first 2 weeks.
All outside of the house, usually.
Yes. And so this all interferes with establishing the milk supply. And if you don't get that milk supply established well by the first 2 weeks, you're sort of playing catch up for a long time.
Mm.
And that's where you might have a baby who's constantly cluster feeding, never seeming satisfied. All they want is to be on the breast 24 hours a day. Like that's not actually normal. They should have periods of time where they come off the breast and they're milk drunk. They should be wetting at least 6 wet diapers a day, generally 4 to 6 poops. That can sometimes change. I do sometimes have babies who are gaining weight beautifully and pooping twice a day. So, again, not a lot of hard and fast rules here. But weight gain is really important. And I would say if a baby is consistently taking an hour or more to feed every time, or they feed for 5 minutes or less every time, or they're feeding more than 15 times a day, then there's probably a breastfeeding problem.
Mm, yeah,
Feeds
something's not
should
right
be,
there.
they should be in the range of like 10 to 50 minutes. Variable times, different feedings might be shorter, some might be longer. That's good and fine. And somewhere in the 10 to 14 times per day. But again, I don't like moms to time feeds and I don't like them to get I don't like them using apps. I don't like too much tracking. Like learn your baby's language, learn to follow their cues. If you suspect a problem, get an IBCLC in there, have their weight checked. And if they're gaining weight, well, then whatever you're doing is working.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's about knowing what is kind of expected. I hesitate to say normal because, normal can vary, but what's to be expected and just making sure that you're somewhat around that, right? You wouldn't want to be doing 6 feeds a day. That's clearly nowhere
Right.
near 8 to 12. That's not even near it. You want to be in the ballpark of kind of what's to be expected. And not to say that something is wrong, but to say at least get checked with a professional that can confirm, yep, you just seem to be one of the people that fall outside of that spectrum, and that's totally fine. Or fall on one of the, outer ends of that spectrum, and that's totally fine. You know what else that kind of popped into my head? And just for listeners, this is a disclaimer that this is not evidence-based at all. It just kind of popped into my head because of how we were talking about it. But I would love to see data. But well, I'll start here. Let me tell you how this thought came to my brain. The blueberries and the on-demand feeding are representative of like intuitive eating in adults, whereas this like regimented schedule feeding of our babies is almost like maybe not exactly restrictive eating, but at least it's like programmed eating almost throughout the day. If you have breakfast every single day at 7 o'clock, the same exact breakfast, and every day you eat at 12, and every night you eat at 5, and there's actually no flexibility in that. There's no intuition. You don't eat when you're hungry. You wait until your next meal. I would love to see some data behind that on whether babies that were allowed to feed on demand and have that intuition kind of honored, are they more likely to have intuitive eating skills or follow an intuitive eating regimen later in life? And are there like, maybe even eating disorders connected to it?
That's a very interesting idea. I don't know. I don't
Yeah.
know the answer to that.
I don't know if that's
Um,
even been looked into.
I probably not because
Because who cares about women
yeah,
and
nobody's
babies?
really exactly. No, they're not. I mean, breastfeeding is way understudied as it is. So a
Yeah.
long-term study like that probably not out there. But I certainly do know that following intuitive eating makes breastfeeding way easier for the mother
Okay.
and way easier for the baby. And I can't tell you how many of my mothers that I work with are so relieved when I tell them, stop tracking.
Mm,
Just watch your baby. Make sure your baby feeds at least every 3 hours. That's the one time parameter I want you to keep an eye on, a loose eye on.
mm,
But stop tracking. Just follow your baby. Because I think there's a tremendous fear about overfeeding babies. That if
yeah.
I overfeed them, they're going to grow up to be obese or having an eating disorder, or they're going to like food too much, or, I'm going to create a problem, a spoiled baby, a baby who uses food as soothing tool. Well, a baby is supposed to do that. And that's how breastfeeding works. You are supposed to soothe them at the breast. You cannot overfeed a breastfeeding baby at the breast. You cannot do it. It's
I
impossible.
I hate how much diet culture has permeated everything in our life. Like, why can't we just be? Why can't we just be with our baby and kind of learn their intuitive cues? It also makes me think, are people who already follow an intuitive eating schedule themselves, are they more likely to be open to feeding on demand because they themselves eat intuitively? And is there any sort of correlation between people who have suffered from an eating disorder in the past? Are they more likely to choose a timed, regimented feeding schedule for their baby? Oh my gosh, my mind is
Y-
going
I would bet that
wild.
that's true. I would bet
Oh,
that
you
that's true.
think so?
I bet yes. I bet that there's a
Wow.
correlation there.
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh my gosh, I hate it. I want to just like punch diet culture in the face. That
Yeah.
makes me so
Well,
frustrated.
here's one thing I see all the time. Moms feed their babies, and their babies are come off the breast seemingly satisfied. They're pretty relaxed. They're calm. They're not showing hunger cues. And then 20 minutes later, they start cueing again. And here the mom says, "I just fed you. I don't understand why you're hungry again. This can't be. I just fed you. How can you be hungry again?" And I say, "Put the baby back on the breast. They want dessert. It's normal.
Mhm.
Dinner and then dessert. That is a normal feeding pattern." They have tiny tummies, right?
Yeah.
Their stomachs are so small. They fill up very, very quickly. And then they need to rest and digest, and then they need to go back. They haven't had enough fat. They haven't had enough calories to get their growth needs met, but their tummy's full, so they rest. Like when we have a big dinner, we don't go straight to dessert. It's not like somebody clears your plate out and then immediately puts dessert down in front of you. You want to like let your dinner settle for a minute. 10 minutes go by, 15 minutes, maybe a half an hour. And then you go back and you have that like final satisfying dessert. Babies do that all the time when they feed. And mom's worried that that means they're feeding too much. There's a problem. Why didn't they get full the first time? Dinner and dessert is a very normal pattern for a baby.
I think that's so reassuring for a lot of people to hear for sure. Okay. What else do we need to know? I feel like we've kind of jumped all around, but we've
Yeah, we did.
talked
We have.
about the prenatal education. Then we kind of talked about, having skin to skin. Don't be separated from your baby. Making sure that we're matching ounces to ounces. What else do we need to know?
I want to make sure that mothers understand that pain is a very good guide for you. It isn't normal to have pain with breastfeeding. Okay, we have definitely normalized and expected breastfeeding to be painful. Moderate, mild to moderate discomfort in the first couple of weeks is normal. Your nipples are not used to being wet and dry 14 times a day, right? On, off, wet, dry, wet, dry, wet, dry. The skin gets a little bit sensitive. That's normal, but they should not be painful. You should not be curling your toes. You should not be cringing when your baby latches on. You should not have cracking, bleeding, blistering, bruising. If you have any of those things, it is definitely an indication that you need to get a latch assessment. And usually it's just a tweak, a little simple tweak of position. Sometimes it's more significant, like a tongue tie or oral dysfunction of some sort. But I want mothers to understand that pain is your body's way of telling you to fix the latch because it isn't just your pain that's the problem. It makes breastfeeding miserable and uncomfortable, and you don't want to do it. And when you're trying to feed a baby 10 to 14 times a day, if you are anticipating a like searing pain on your nipple, you are going to delay it. Of course you are. It can be so bad. I mean, the pain is intense when it's bad. The nipples are designed to be exquisitely sensitive for a reason. And that reason is nature's way of protecting you and your baby. Because if your baby's latch is incorrect and it's painful, they actually aren't removing milk. They're nipple feeding, they're not breastfeeding. So if they're feeding on your nipple, they are not getting the milk out of your breast. They are going to not gain enough weight and you're going to lose your milk supply. So pain is your body's way of saying, fix it. Nature is very smart.
And who do we call in those scenarios? An IBCLC, a CLC, they should be coming to our home. What do we need to know about finding someone to help us? Are there national websites we can refer to? Is our local Facebook group a good place?
I think a local referral is probably always going to be your best bet. I mean, IBCLCs are going to be your top tier lactation consultants who have many, many, many more hours of education and experience. Not to say at all that an LC can't be fantastic. They probably just don't have the same level of education and hours and experience. And you can't replace experience. Just like when you're looking for a good midwife, you want a midwife that's got a lot of experience. So I think local referrals are probably the best. I mean, of course, there are national databases and directories where you can Google and search, but if someone had a good experience, lots of people have had a good experience with an IBCLC, then that's probably the one you want to go to.
Yeah. Okay, what else do we need to know? Is there anything we need to talk about, like for partner support or once you get home or
Yeah,
nutrition, hydration, any of that?
so before we wrap, let's just go back to the first 2 weeks for a minute and just let me reiterate how important it is for breastfeeding success and for post-birth recovery to set yourself up for success in the first 2 weeks by eliminating all responsibilities and obligations to anything other than yourself and your baby. And yourself means just your sleep. It's pretty much your baby. Somebody else needs to be cooking for you, bringing you every meal, refilling your water. Somebody needs to be watering the plants. Somebody needs to be changing the litter box, walking the dog, making any necessary appointments, fielding phone calls, all of it. If you can just dedicate those first 2 weeks to staying in bed and resting and being skin to skin with your baby and having nothing else to do other than sleep, go to the bathroom, take a shower, and feed your baby, you're going to have such an easier time breastfeeding than if you don't. Breastfeeding is a lot of work in the beginning, but it becomes so much less work over time. If you choose to bottle feed or formula feed, the level of effort remains the same every single day you do it. It never gets easier. It starts off kind of middle of the road and it stays middle of the road until the day you stop feeding your baby. Breastfeeding starts off very high on the workload scale. In the first 2 weeks, we're approaching like 100% effort. And then it drops, and it drops way below bottle feeding because you never have to think about warming milk. You never have to think about cleaning a bottle. You never have to remember to bring anything. And it's the easiest way to calm and satisfy and soothe your baby for however long you choose to breastfeed.
Okay, question about pacifiers. Are they going to disrupt breastfeeding?
Early on, yes. So, in my experience, most babies who are latching really well and feeding really well with a good milk supply don't end up wanting a pacifier at all. If you use a pacifier a lot in the first 2 to 3 weeks, you're going to limit the amount of time they're at your breast. And if you limit the amount of time they're at your breast, that's going to impact your milk supply. Now, I don't mind a little bit of pacifier use if a baby is traveling in the car. You can't be feeding at that time. Maybe during a diaper change, if you're in the shower and your partner's holding the baby for a little bit and the baby's hungry and they just need to suck a little bit while you get dressed or, get ready to feed them, fine. But all their sucking needs should be at the breast in the first few weeks. Once breastfeeding is well established, weight gain is on track, and everything is going really smoothly, if they still want a pacifier here and there just at the end of a feeding to settle, very limited amount of time, then that's probably okay. But you really don't ever want to use it to delay feedings or like use it as a replacement for that dessert feed that we talked about.
Yeah. Or just by way of making your baby sleep longer because they're sucking and they're comfortable, it may make
Yes.
them actually not necessarily miss their hunger cues because they'll still be hungry, but they may not wake up as early. And so now we're delaying that connection between you and your baby. And it's just like this ugly spiral that can really get out of control pretty easily.
Sure can. Yes. And like I said, when breastfeeding is going well, a lot of babies just they push that pacifier right out because they're like, I don't need to suck or I want to be on the breast. Like, what is this?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it'll obviously never be just like your mom because it's not human skin.
It's
It's like a
silicone.
silicone. Yeah, it's a plastic thing. So, okay, partner support. I think we can probably wrap up here, but we know that partner support is crucial. And that if your partner doesn't support you, it actually can be really, really hard to be successful at breastfeeding because you can feel really alone and like you just don't have any help. So, what do we need to know about preparing our partners to be supportive, but also to actually help propel our success in breastfeeding?
So I strongly encourage partners to attend the prenatal breastfeeding class. If a mom is going to take it, if you can have your partner be there, then that's hugely helpful. One, because it's so much information. So having a second set of ears is really helpful. But two, just to kind of hammer home to them how much effort this takes because they have no idea what to expect. I mean, you're going to be with the baby 24/7. And sometimes dads are like, wait, like where's my role in this? Like, I want to bond with the baby. I want to be with the baby. I want to feed the baby. It's the mom's job to feed the baby
Mm,
in the beginning. If your plan is to exclusively breastfeed, it is your job to feed the baby. And your husband can feed the baby later on down the line when you may introduce a bottle, at least not in the first 3 to 4 weeks.
yeah.
So they need to just have an understanding of how much effort it takes and how much time you're going to spend with the baby. And they need to be supportive of that. And they need to do all the things that we talked about around the house to help ensure that you're not stressed and worried about the, regular activities of daily life that need attending to. And of course, believing in your ability to do this is so
Yeah.
important.
That's my number one, I think.
Yeah, and if you're uncomfortable and you're tired and your neck is hurting from leaning over, like if your partner can just come over and rub your shoulders a little, put a warm compress over your shoulders, like that can be so helpful for getting your milk to let down, for just making you feel loved and supported. They need to believe in it at the same level that you do.
And just
And it,
making you feel encouraged, right? So, like, yes, this is hard. You can do this, or yes, this is hard. Let's make a appointment with an IBCLC. Remember, we learned on the Birth Launch podcast that pain is an indicator that we should talk to somebody. Like, encourage them to either keep going if it is normal, or to seek out that support if you notice that it's not.
yes, and I'm always so impressed by how many dads do come to
Oh,
the
good.
visits, dads or partners. Like most of the time, moms are not coming alone.
That's
And
awesome.
that's very helpful and it's a very good sign.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, that's great. Okay. Is there anything else that we need to know in terms of setting ourselves up for, a really successful breastfeeding relationship?
Just that if you want to do it, you should do it. You can do it. And with the right support, you will do it.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, I love that. Trisha, this has been amazing. Okay, tell us where people can connect with you. Tell us where we can get your course. Tell us where people can sign up for support with you. And then where can they find you on social media and then your podcast as well.
Yes. So the prenatal breastfeeding course, so it's kind of a, I don't know if I'd call it a course, but it's their one-on-ones. So
Okay.
you can just reach out to me and schedule it. And I do it one-on-one mainly so that we can go through any medical history, past history, things like that. So it's more individualized. So you can find my contact at the Down to Birth Show on Instagram or the podcast Down to Birth Show. At the end of every show note, the podcast, we have contact information there. So you can email me, you can text me, DM. That's the best way to get in touch because we get too many of those. And it doesn't matter where you are in the world because virtual lactation consulting is actually really effective. Every now and then we have to figure out how to get an in-person evaluation if I'm really worried about tongue tie or something like that. But for the most part, everything can be managed virtually. So I see women from all across the country, even different countries.
I love to hear you say that because people are so hesitant to it. And I'm like, no, you can accomplish so much without having to leave your house. Just give it a try.
It's so much easier. I had the idea. Do you remember
Yeah.
Skype when Skype was
Yeah.
thing? So when Skype first came out, I was like, oh wow, I should do virtual lactation consulting. This was many, many years ago. And I was like, no way, that'll never work. It'll never
Yeah.
work. Like you have to touch and how am I gonna get a mom and baby to figure out latch if I can't get my hands in there and help them? And then when the world shut down, we were forced into virtual and it was amazing how it just was like, wait, this totally works. And actually having a mom do it all herself instead of me being in there and touching and moving and shaping and all that, it's actually better because they have so much more confidence if they do it themselves.
Yeah.
So I'm a huge
Yeah.
fan of it. And you're
I
right, we don't
love
have to
it.
leave the house. It's huge.
It is huge. Oh my gosh, I love it so much. All right. Cool. Thank you so much for being here. I
Oh, thank you.
appreciate you. And this was fun and this was super, super informative. And I hope all of you listening are walking away with a lot more confidence going into breastfeeding because Trisha and I both know that that can be very overwhelming. It can feel really daunting and it can feel kind of unnerving if you're doing it for the first time. But I promise you, you will get the hang of it. There is support out there. And if you really want to do it, you absolutely can. All right, you guys, go follow Trisha online and find her and her co-host on Down to Birth Show on social media. And you can find me at Tranquility by HeHe and the.birth.lounge. Until next time, head to your app store and download the Birth Lounge app for evidence-based childbirth education and data-driven postpartum support delivered straight to your phone. Until next time. Bye. Thank you so much for tuning in today. I truly do value this community and I love hanging out with you. You deserve to have a birth that you love with a provider that values your autonomy and respects informed consent. It's an honor to be your go-to gal when it comes to preparing for your baby. If you found today's episode helpful, share it with a friend. Share it with someone who could use evidence-based information to help them have an informed and confident birth. I'd love to hear what you have to say and read your sweet words. By leaving us a review, you are helping other expectant mamas and their families find the podcast so that we can reduce birth trauma and improve maternity care in the U.S. one birth at a time. If you're interested in joining the Birth Lounge, go to thebirthlounge.com. If you want to connect with me on socials, you can find me at Tranquility by HeHe on all platforms. Until next time, stay educated, stay supported, stay confident. Bye.